Super Lucky Disaster Man. Chapter 21, The cat turns back into a human. If it were an enemy, that would be easier to deal with. But the reality was that this was an innocent civilian, whose only unique trait was knowing Dazai Osamu. For Nakahara Chuya, whose knowledge of Komai de Nagito was limited to this, it felt extremely embarrassing. Luckily, Komai de Nagito had not yet turned back into a human and remained an elegant and beautiful Siberian forest cat. Nakahara Chuya hesitated for a moment before awkwardly apologizing, feeling that apologizing to a cat was much easier than apologizing to a person. "Sorry, I didn't know you were a human earlier." With a stiff and embarrassed expression, Nakahara Chuya quickly left Dazai Osamu's office. He had come hoping to see Dazai Osamu get embarrassed, but now he was the one feeling humiliated. Why stay any longer? Feeling embarrassed in front of a cat was one thing, but if he had to face a person. Nakahara Chuya shuddered at the thought and refused to imagine further. As he closed the door, he heard Dazai Osamu's voice at a volume he could still catch. "Finally, that nuisance is gone. Now we can get down to business." Nakahara Chuya's hand froze for a moment on the door, but he held himself back from turning around and closed it firmly. If he went back now, Dazai Osamu would surely undo the ability that turned that person into a cat. What could be more embarrassing than realizing you just petted someone for half a day, thinking they were a cat? He would feel even more uncomfortable than he did now. Dazai Osamu definitely did it on purpose. Thinking it was part of Dazai Osamu's scheme, and given his many experiences of being tricked before, Nakahara Chuya quickly made up his mind and hurriedly left. Komai de Nagito, regretfully watching Nakahara Chuya's hurried departure, felt deeply disappointed. Meow meow meow. Ah, why couldn't he wait until I turned back into a human before leaving? I still wanted to talk more with this ability user. Hearing the regret in the cat's meows, Dazai Osamu dropped his smile and said disapprovingly, "Komaeda-kun, I know you tend to admire people with special abilities, but let's just forget about that pipsqueak from earlier. Don't make me question your taste." Komaeda the cat innocently let out a soft meow. "Fine." Dazai Osamu knocked on the table. "Talking to you like this is tiring. Let's turn you back into a human quickly. Are you still wearing clothes?" Komaeda the cat nodded. The last time the person trying to extract information turned him back into a human for a short time, he was still wearing clothes. So undoing the ability now shouldn't be a problem. After getting his answer, Dazai Osamu casually stroked Komaeda the cat's soft fur. The silky, fluffy texture made Dazai Osamu pause for a moment, but before he could fully enjoy it, Komaeda the cat had already turned back into human form. Sitting on Dazai Osamu's desk, Komaeda Nagito looked down at his hands, readjusting to his human body, and said excitedly, "Thank you, Dazai-kun. I can't imagine what I would have done if you hadn't helped me. I really am such a useless person, always getting into trouble while trying to help, almost dragging Ayatsuji-sensei down with me." Sitting on someone else's desk while talking wasn't exactly polite, so as Komaeda Nagito spoke, he started to jump off the desk. "You can stay there." Dazai Osamu lazily leaned back in his chair, propping his legs up on the desk. This way, he didn't have to crane his neck and could look directly at Komaeda Nagito. The sofa was stained with coffee earlier and is out for cleaning. "It hasn't come back yet." Komaeda Nagito smiled helplessly and said, "So, when we were talking on the phone, you did fall off the sofa, didn't you?" Thanks to his enhanced hearing after turning into a cat, he swore he had heard everything and could perfectly imagine the scene. Dazai Osamu shrugged. At that time, he had been lying on the sofa, preparing to broadcast some music. There was a coffee cup resting on top of a folder next to him on the coffee table. Without thinking much, he had casually placed it there. But when he laughed so hard that he rolled off the sofa, he accidentally knocked over the folder. Due to the lever effect, the coffee cup flew into the air and ended up spilling all over the sofa. It was the kind of strange, unpredictable situation that occasionally happened, so Dazai Osamu didn't dwell on it. Instead, he shifted the conversation to something he found more interesting. So, how was your vacation? It seems like it was pretty eventful. Why don't you tell me about it? Even though Komaeda Nagito had mentioned his vacation before, he hadn't explained the specifics. And because of the odd conversation he overheard between the two adults on the phone, Dazai Osamu's curiosity was piqued. Komaeda Nagito didn't hold anything back. He talked about winning the lottery, then moved on to how his neighbor was a detective, and how his neighbor happened to receive a commission. After that, he described the various strange encounters he had on the island, including a monkey guiding him and stumbling into a secret passage after a fall. Dazai Osamu. He silently listened, his internal intelligence on Komaeda Nagito's absurd luck constantly updating. After hearing the entire thrilling tale, which could have been turned into a novel, Dazai Osamu, with rare sincerity, remarked, "Why do I never get involved in such fun things? Port Mafia missions were truly boring." In fact, even someone like Otasaku, who worked at the lowest level of the Port Mafia, had a more interesting day-to-day job than him. Komaeda Nagito thought for a moment. Must be a luck issue. You know how it is. At that moment, someone knocked on the door, interrupting their conversation. It was the people delivering the sofa. The efficiency of the Port Mafia's logistics wasn't very high, and since the original sofa hadn't yet been cleaned, the logistics team had intended to wait until it dried before bringing it back. However, they had heard rumors that Nakahara Chuya had mentioned a guest visiting Dazai Osamu. The logistics team became anxious and decided to bring in a replacement sofa immediately, as they couldn't leave the office of an important figure like Dazai Osamu without a sofa when he had a guest. It would make them look stingy. The door wasn't locked, so after hearing Dazai Osamu's call to come in, the logistics team opened the door. And then, the four members of the logistics team were completely stunned. There really was a guest, still a youth, appearing younger than Dazai Osamu by a year or two, likely a high school student. This alone was shocking, because they knew Dazai Osamu didn't handle external affairs. It was rare for outsiders to visit his office. And they were certain this boy wasn't a member of the Port Mafia. As strange as that was, it wasn't even the most shocking part. What was truly bizarre was that this unknown boy was sitting directly on Dazai Osamu's desk, casually chatting with him. There was still a single-seater sofa nearby, so why was the guest sitting on the desk? The logistics team pretended not to notice anything unusual and calmly brought in the new sofa, preparing to remove the mismatched single-seater. Dazai Osamu didn't pay any attention to the people coming in and out. He acted as if they weren't there and resumed the conversation. Komaeda-kun, have you ever considered joining the Port Mafia? I think I'll be promoted to an executive soon, and when that happens, I'll definitely make you one of my direct subordinates. I feel like with you by my side, I'd never get bored. Logistics team. What? While it's true that executives can choose their subordinates, isn't this reason a little too casual? Komaeda Nagito smiled wryly. I'm honored that you'd consider me, but someone like me would only cause trouble for you, Dazai-kun. I'd just be a burden, so please allow me to decline. I don't mind trouble, Dazai Osamu replied. I really want to be Komaeda-kun's friend, but Komaeda-kun keeps pushing me away. He had already noticed this problem long ago. In fact, after overhearing the conversation between Kudo Shinichi and Komaeda Nagito with the listening device he'd planted earlier, Dazai Osamu knew that Kudo Shinichi wanted to become a famous detective. Despite knowing Komaeda Nagito for quite some time, Kudo Shinichi hadn't even realized this and had foolishly tried to befriend Komaeda Nagito. Being rejected was almost inevitable. The logistics team, who were in the process of moving the sofas, were so shocked by this conversation that they nearly dropped the furniture. Is this really Dazai Osamu? Though Dazai Osamu was only 17, it was impossible to treat him like a typical teenager. Talking about making friends so innocently felt like something a fake Dazai Osamu would say. However, Komaeda Nagito, unfazed, smiled and said, I just feel that keeping a distance is good for everyone. Besides, Dazai-kun, you weren't really sincere when you said those things, right? Indeed, Dazai Osamu was only interested in Komaeda Nagito, but that was far from genuinely wanting to be friends. If he had been serious, he wouldn't have so casually brought Komaeda Nagito directly to the Port Mafia, nor would he have let the Port Mafia members see Komaeda Nagito in his office. The Port Mafia wasn't unbreakable like steel. If word got out that Komaeda Nagito was a friend of Dazai Osamu, it could put Komaeda, a civilian, in danger. People might use him as leverage, which could threaten his safety. For those Dazai Osamu truly considered friends, no one in the Port Mafia even knew about their relationship. Of course, part of this was because Dazai Osamu didn't often work at the Port Mafia headquarters, so he rarely encountered them. But even more so, it was because Dazai Osamu deliberately avoided interacting too much with them in such places. Komaeda Nagito didn't know how Dazai Osamu treated other friends, he only knew what real friends were like. Kudo Shinichi had just recently set a perfect example, so it wasn't something he'd forget so quickly. Although many people thought Komaeda Nagito was the type who couldn't read the room, in reality, when he wanted to, he was very sensitive to other people's attitudes. He just usually didn't care. But Dazai Osamu, with his constant double-faced behavior, often saying things that led people to misunderstand him, was someone even Komaeda Nagito couldn't ignore. Clearly, you don't mean it, yet you keep saying these things. Even I will start to get confused. Komaeda Nagito smiled and continued, Dazai-kun, you obviously have more important things to focus on, so don't waste your time on someone like me. The logistics team quietly left the room, closing the door behind them. How terrifying. Who exactly was that boy? How could he talk to Dazai-sama like that? And why did he say Dazai-sama wasn't serious about wanting to be friends with him? Isn't it obvious from Dazai-sama's attitude that he's being serious? Even though the sofa had arrived, neither of them changed positions, and they continued their conversation as they were. If you put it that way, I have a question for you, Dazai Osamu asked curiously. Have you ever had any friends? Even as a Port Mafia intelligence officer, it was impossible to find any information about Komaeda Nagito having significant relationships with friends from childhood to middle school. The best they could find was, had relatively good relationships with certain people. The person Komaeda Nagito had the best connection with, according to the records, was Kudo Shinichi. Dazai Osamu already knew that Komaeda Nagito had rejected being friends with him, which only made him more curious. Without hesitation, Komaeda Nagito replied, I used to. Not expecting such a straightforward answer, Dazai Osamu was momentarily surprised. Are you still in contact? He passed away in an unfortunate car accident, Komaeda Nagito said. I cancelled a family trip to attend his funeral. Later, I found out that the cruise we had planned to take sank, and many people died, so I remember it very clearly. From this description, Dazai Osamu finally matched Komaeda Nagito's friend to a particular child in the elementary school records. The problem was, this friend was likely only a friend in Komaeda Nagito's mind. That kid was extremely popular, everyone liked him and wanted to be his friend. The records showed that he treated Komaeda Nagito just like anyone else, with no special affection, hence why he wasn't listed as one of Komaeda Nagito's friends in the intelligence reports. He was my best friend. While Dazai Osamu was deep in thought, Komaeda Nagito, as if triggered by memories, spoke nostalgically. After losing that friend, I was really heartbroken. I wondered, why am I so unlucky? I finally had a friend, and then he died. But his death, as unfortunate as it was, ended up saving my entire family, so the loss didn't hit me as hard. Lies. Dazai Osamu thought to himself. Being so cautious about friendship, is it because of that event? Do you feel that one day a friend might disappear as part of the cost of your luck, so you've simply rejected intimate relationships from the start? Even saying these things now is likely your way of hinting to me to stop talking about becoming your friend, because it's a dangerous endeavor. However, not only did Dazai Osamu not plan to stop, but his interest had been further piqued with a touch of seriousness. As expected, I still want to be Komaeda-kun's friend. Dazai Osamu stood up, and now it was his turn to look down at Komai de Nagito. He smiled playfully, directly aiming to conquer his target. So, Komai-de-kun, would you like to tell me how I can become your friend? Chapter 21 End. Chapter 22, Port Mafia Rumors. It was the first time Komai de Nagito had encountered someone so persistent in wanting to be his friend. Even Kudo Shinichi, after being reminded once, didn't bring it up again, even though they still interacted regularly. But Dazai Osamu, on the other hand, treated it as if he had found an amusing toy, constantly poking at it whenever he could. Dazai Osamu wasn't stupid, in fact, he was much smarter than most people. So why did he lack self-awareness when it came to this? Komai de Nagito dropped his smile, adopting a slightly annoyed but outwardly calm tone as he spoke. Dazai-kun, if you're trying to use me or just seeking amusement, I think it's best to stop here. Even if you're not my friend, I'll still cooperate with whatever you want. Dazai Osamu responded with a knowing tone, Komai-de-kun, you're quite considerate. To those he deemed worthy, no matter how distant the relationship, Komai-de didn't mind being used. His enthusiastic attitude was masked by a cold and logical way of thinking. But even so, if necessary, Komai-de-kun would likely sacrifice himself for a complete stranger. This contradictory and twisted nature was something Dazai Osamu rarely encountered. Komai de Nagito sighed helplessly. Thanks for the compliment. If Dazai-kun could also show some consideration, I'd be extremely grateful. Dazai Osamu burst out laughing. Typically, Komai de Nagito showed respect and admiration, lowering himself in almost every interaction. Yet, occasionally, when things didn't align with his expectations, he would slip in a comment or two like this, revealing his pride in subtle ways. Komai-de-kun had a set of criteria by which he judged everything, even those he considered worth knowing. How could someone truly insecure have the arrogance to evaluate others from on high? I've come to understand how Komai-de-kun thinks, Dazai Osamu said, taking a step back, leaning one hand on the desk, and smiling at Komai de Nagito. But this level of conversation isn't enough to scare me away, is it? Death has never been something that frightens me. Komai de Nagito mused, numbness, amputation and burns. Dazai Osamu, equally thoughtful, replied, I'd rather avoid those. I hate pain. My ideal death would be peaceful, comfortable, and mentally invigorating. I hate pain too. Komai de Nagito agreed, sharing a rare moment of mutual understanding. But sometimes, there's no avoiding it, and that can be quite troublesome. It was as if the tense conversation from moments ago had never occurred. Both intelligent individuals quickly returned to a more relaxed exchange. After all, they don't actually wanted to never interact with each other again. Dazai Osamu, curious, asked, why would you put yourself through that? Well, when I need to achieve my goals, Komai de Nagito explained. I'll deliberately cause myself misfortune, and getting hurt is the most convenient way. Dazai Osamu raised an eyebrow. So, you can control your luck to a certain extent? You could say that, but most of the time, I don't intentionally do it. Komai de Nagito sighed. Accidents happen too often, and sometimes it's hard to predict how much misfortune will be necessary. Dazai Osamu stared at him in amazement. Such new information. Being able to manipulate luck like this was almost like having an ability, yet it wasn't classified as one. In every aspect, Komai de Nagito was an anomaly. To be able to control something as intangible as luck to this degree, Komai de Nagito must have conducted numerous experiments. Still, the conclusion remained the same. If anyone else had experienced what Komai de Nagito had, they would have likely broken long ago. But Komai-de had managed to turn luck into a semi-voluntary skill. And yet, this person still constantly downplayed and belittled himself. How could any ordinary person compare? Sensing that the atmosphere had returned to normal, Komai de Nagito took the opportunity to say his goodbyes. It's getting late. I should probably leave. Dazai Osamu, having just heard so many interesting things, appeared quite lively. Ah, Are you leaving already? Why not stay for a meal? I'm free today. Before he could finish, the phone on the desk rang. Both of them glanced at the ringing phone, then exchanged a look. Komaeda Nagito resumed his usual polite smile. Aren't you going to answer, Dazai-kun? Dazai Osamu sighed deeply, looking at the number displayed on the screen. He picked up the phone. Mori-san. You always call at just the right time, don't you? Mori Ogai could hear that Dazai Osamu's tone was a bit off, but he didn't care much. It's still work time, Dazai-kun. There's a task. Dazai Osamu half-heartedly responded with a series of ahas, and after hanging up the phone, he grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair and said, Let's go, Komaeda-kun, I'll take you downstairs. Komaeda Nagito didn't refuse. Earlier, when Nakahara Chuya had brought him up, he realized that the Port Mafia elevator required authentication to operate. He quickly caught up with Dazai Osamu, noticing that someone had already gone ahead to press the elevator button. I've caused you quite a bit of trouble today, Dazai-kun. Just tell me more of your interesting stories later, and that'll make up for it. Dazai Osamu grumbled, this place is so boring, and the boss don't even look busy. The elevator doors opened. Dazai-kun. Standing by the elevator, a female voice with a hint of exasperation chimed in. The fact that you don't see him as busy probably means you're the one who's too idle, doesn't it? Dazai Osamu's expression didn't change as he greeted her, Koyone-san, it's not my fault that I always finish my tasks so efficiently. That's quite an excuse. The only female executive in the Port Mafia, Ozaki Koyo, glanced at Komaeda Nagito curiously as the two entered the elevator. Dazai-kun, is this, your friend? Mori-san might have been too busy to notice the rumors, but as the one responsible for handling intelligence, Ozaki Koyo certainly wouldn't overlook the gossip. She had first heard about it when she noticed Nakahara Chuya with a twisted expression in the hallway. She had asked him what was wrong, only to receive a shocking answer. Earlier, someone was carrying a cat, saying it was for Dazai. So, I brought it up to him. Nakahara Chuya hadn't given a reason, but Ozaki Koyo instantly knew that Chuya had intended to stir up trouble with Dazai. And then, Nakahara Chuya's face twisted again. Turns out it wasn't an actual cat, but a person affected by an ability. He came to have his ability neutralized by Dazai. Upon hearing that, Ozaki Koyo felt she understood. So, it was a case of a cat being petted and then turning back into a person, leaving a psychological scar. She sympathetically offered, if you want to pet real cats, I know a cat cafe where I can guarantee they're all real cats. That's not the point. Nakahara Chuya, realizing what Ozaki Koyo was implying, stomped his foot. The point is that Dazai claimed this person is his friend. He's not even part of the Port Mafia, just a regular outsider. Ozaki Koyo. Seeing Ozaki Koyo's stunned expression gave Nakahara Chuya some comfort. However, he quickly realized that being so shocked about Dazai having a friend made him look a little foolish. He tried to save face by adding, Koyone-san, the guy even casually told this outsider about his ability. Dazai knows what he's doing. Ozaki Koyo responded with a subtle expression. And I know what you're trying to say. In reality, the fact that Dazai would have a friend was indeed surprising. That is, if this was truly a friend and not just something he made up to mess with Chuya. At the time, Ozaki Koyo hadn't given the matter much thought until the logistics team brought her some rather precious gossip. Yes, the guest was sitting on Dazai-sama's desk. One of the logistics workers said, wiping sweat from his brow. Ozaki Koyo rubbed her temples. I understand. Go receive your punishment. A gossiping member getting caught, if she didn't punish him, the Port Mafia would fall into chaos. But Ozaki Koyo could understand their shock. Normally, they were very tight-lipped, and the fact that they hadn't spoken up until now must have been killing them. And so, here she was now. Ozaki Koyo finally got to see the legendary friend of Dazai Osamu. He looked to be around 15 or 16 years old, completely exuding the harmless aura of someone not connected to the underworld. No matter how she looked at him, he didn't seem like someone who would be associated with Dazai Osamu. Dazai Osamu didn't bother introducing Ozaki Koyo to Komai de Nagito, and Ozaki Koyo didn't push the issue. After all, if this boy really was an outsider, the less he knew about the Port Mafia, the better. However, this somewhat thin but upright boy, who smiled so gently, responded in a polite yet cold tone, "No, Dazai-kun and I don't have that kind of relationship." Ozaki Koyo, Dazai-kun. The logistics staff had some common sense, so even though they had overheard part of the conversation, they hadn't shared what they heard with Ozaki Koyo. This was the first time Ozaki Koyo realized that the boy in question didn't acknowledge the relationship Dazai claimed they had. Dazai Osamu put on a theatrically sorrowful expression. "If Komai de-kun thinks that way, there's nothing I can do." Komai de Nagito, with a hint of helplessness, said, "Dazai-kun just loves to joke around." Seeing this amusing exchange, Ozaki Koyo couldn't help but grow curious. "How did you two meet?" Dazai Osamu blinked a few times. "Since Komai de-kun doesn't remember clearly, I'll explain. Komai de-kun was kidnapped, and I lent him a phone to call the police." Ozaki Koyo. "What a chaotic mess." Komai de Nagito smiled wryly. "From the moment we first met, I've always been causing trouble for Dazai-kun. How could someone like me shamelessly call myself Dazai-kun's friend? Dazai-kun is such a dazzling person, he really shouldn't keep joking about this with me." Ozaki Koyo. "What's going on? This friend of Dazai's seems a bit off." Chapter 22 end. Chapter 23, Senpai, do you want to move to my house? Ozaki Koyo trusted her survival instincts, but at this moment, she chose to remain silent. There was no way Dazai Osamu hadn't noticed that there was something off about this ordinary person. She decided to ask Dazai about it later. After the elevator reached the first floor, Dazai Osamu casually called over someone and gestured to Komai de Nagito. "Take him home." Before Komai de Nagito could say a word of thanks, Ozaki Koyo spoke first. "Komai de-kun, it's late now. No taxis will come near the Port Mafia headquarters at this hour, so let someone take you back." "Thank you, you all are really kind," Komai de Nagito said as he thought about it and accepted the offer. Ozaki Koyo. How long had it been since someone called her kind? And to compliment Dazai's kindness as well. The passers-by all looked like they had seen a ghost. After Komai de Nagito left, Ozaki Koyo immediately asked Dazai Osamu, "What's the deal with that kid?" At first glance, he seemed completely normal, but thinking it over carefully, an ordinary person standing inside the Port Mafia headquarters, chatting so calmly, that in itself was quite strange, wasn't it? Did Ane-san figure it out? Dazai Osamu chuckled as they walked. "Don't worry, Komai de-kun just has a slightly interesting personality, that's all. I've got his file. I'll send it to you later." Dazai Osamu's clear reassurance, coupled with his openness in offering the file, actually put Ozaki Koyo at ease. But then, if there wasn't an issue with him personally, a new question arose. Dazai-kun. Ozaki Koyo, who had once dreamed of running away with someone she loved, only for it to lead to their death, had fully accepted reality now and no longer sought to touch the light. She furrowed her brows slightly as she spoke. "Don't carelessly drag people from outside into our world. If it were that easy for him to die, he wouldn't be Komai de-kun. Besides, Komai de-kun himself doesn't care, he's even said he'd be willing to sacrifice himself for me." "Really?" Ozaki Koyo thought back to the silver-haired boy's earlier demeanor, her lips twitching in disbelief. "I feel he doesn't seem to care about you as much as you think." Even though he had put on a show of, "I'm not worthy of being Dazai-kun's friend," if you thought about it carefully, it didn't seem like self-deprecation at all. On the contrary, it felt like hidden disdain. Since when had Dazai-kun become so self-absorbed? Understanding what Ozaki Koyo was getting at, Dazai Osamu nonchalantly replied, as long as I still meet his standard of worth tolerating, it doesn't matter what attitude he has towards me. It won't affect what he'll do for me. Ozaki Koyo felt a headache coming in. There were plenty of people in the port mafia willing to sacrifice themselves for Dazai, so why was he so fixated on this innocent-looking, ordinary student? She could now fully understand Chuya's sympathetic expression when he brought up the topic. Getting involved with Dazai Osamu never brought any good. How did that kid end up catching Dazai's attention? What exactly do you see in that kid? Dazai Osamu paused, surprised that someone had finally asked him that question. After thinking seriously for a moment, he answered. Komai-de-kun is a bit crazy, I suppose that's what I like about him. Ozaki Koyo raised an eyebrow. In what way is he crazy? Dazai Osamu smiled, his eyes reflecting a faint emptiness, the kind that hinted at something deeper. In a quiet voice, he replied, in a way that's not so different from me. Komaeda Nagito was escorted back to his home in Yokohama by someone from the port mafia. The first thing he did was check his mailbox. Aside from the advertisements and newspapers that had piled up over the past few days, there was a phone buried beneath the papers. It had been left by Amuro-san. When he had turned into a cat, there was no place on his body to carry anything, so the phone had been in Amuro-san's possession all along. How did he know where I live? Komaeda Nagito didn't dwell too much on this question. After all, he had already figured out that Amuro Toru wasn't just a regular citizen researching folklore. A person capable of hiding his identity like that likely had a more complicated background, and it wouldn't have been difficult for him to find Komaida's address. Komaeda Nagito retrieved the phone, gathered the advertisements and newspapers, and carried them into his home. Since he frequently encountered accidents that led to him misplacing his keys, he had long since replaced his door lock with a fingerprint system. It was proving to be a very wise decision. He had only been away from his Yokohama home for a short time, and the interior didn't appear particularly dusty, but he still opened the windows for ventilation. Then, he sat down on the sofa, turned on the TV, and multitasked, listening to the news while checking his emails on his phone. The voice of the news anchor reached Komaeda Nagito's ears. Regarding the recent disappearance of 2 tourists on Reigo Island, there have been new developments. Komaeda quickly sent an email to Ayatsuji Yukito, letting him know that he had turned back into a human. He mentioned that his luggage was still with Ayatsuji-sensei and that he'd retrieve it once he returned to Tokyo. Ayatsuji Yukito responded almost immediately, "Don't return to Tokyo for the next couple of days. Stay in Yokohama for now and don't come back to my place." Komaeda Nagito recalled that Ayatsuji Yukito had previously mentioned that resolving this case would likely draw the attention of the Special Division. He now understood the situation. In a case involving the deaths of more than a dozen people, regardless of the fact that they were all criminals, the Special Division for Unusual Powers, just from the sound of their name, wasn't the kind of organization that would let things slide easily. They definitely wouldn't let Ayatsuji Yukito, the one who orchestrated it all, off the hook. This was a delicate and troublesome situation, and Komaeda Nagito really wasn't in a position to return to Tokyo. Given his bad luck, even if the situation had nothing to do with him, he'd probably end up getting involved if he went back. Conveniently, the TV news was now reporting on the same case. According to police, the case involved a conspiracy among 17 individuals. All 17 are now deceased as a result of internal conflicts. The police have refused to disclose specific details, but compensation will be provided to the victims' families in the coming days. Internal conflicts. That's not entirely wrong, Komaeda thought, watching the TV. After all, accidental gunfire and various misfortunes had occurred. Even a seasoned detective reviewing the scene could only conclude that it was the result of infighting. The Special Division must have stepped in to help cover up the truth. Komaeda Nagito looked up at the TV and commented, "Is this how the police control the narrative to hide the existence of special abilities? That must be tough. Just like how many people in Yokohama knew about the existence of abilities after the Dragon's Head conflict last year but chose to ignore it, it can't be that the authorities believe they were hiding the truth well." Or maybe the people in charge just didn't want the responsibility, so they didn't report the full situation to their superiors. That would make sense. After recognizing the next part of the news as meaningless fake information meant to deceive the public, Komaeda Nagito lowered his head again and continued going through his emails. Just then, his phone rang. He quickly answered, "Good evening, Senpai." Kudo Shinichi's anxious voice came through. "I was watching the news. Something serious happened on Reigo Island, and the police are covering it up." "Weren't you vacationing on Reigo Island? Are you?" Komaeda Nagito thought for a moment. "Kudo-kun, are you trying to find out the truth?" "No, if you tell me, Senpai, it'll probably cause trouble for you, right?" Kudo Shinichi had already figured out that the case had some hidden elements the police didn't want anyone to know about. But he hadn't called to ask about that. "I just wanted to check if you're okay. I've been calling, but your phone was off, and I was worried something had happened to you." "Well, something did happen, but it's already been resolved," Komaeda Nagito said with a smile. Kudo Shinichi let out a sigh of relief. "Are you back home now?" "I'm in Yokohama right now. It might take a few days before I can return to Tokyo." "Senpai." Kudo Shinichi's voice suddenly became sharper, more perceptive. "When you said something happened, could it be that Dazai helped you solve the problem?" Komaeda Nagito was genuinely surprised. He hadn't expected Kudo Shinichi to figure out the truth based on such little information. "Kudo-kun, you're definitely going to become a great detective. Even if you're complimenting me at a time like this, it doesn't make me happy." Kudo Shinichi sighed. "Senpai, my personal advice is to keep your distance from Dazai. He's very dangerous." Komaeda Nagito responded, "I know, Kudo-kun. Thank you for your concern. But to taken care of someone like me." Kudo Shinichi sighed again. "Senpai, don't say such silly things. We're free, anyway, I'm glad you're safe. About Reigo Island, when you know what you can or cannot talk about, let me know. I'm really interested in this case. See you when school starts." He knew there was more to this case, and eventually, Senpai would likely have to sign some sort of confidentiality agreement. While he could get the truth now, asking would only cause Senpai more trouble, so he was willing to wait. "Alright," Komaeda Nagito replied with a smile, pretending not to notice Kudo Shinichi almost slipping and using the word friends. "See you when school starts." After hanging up, Komaeda Nagito's smile faded. He stared at his phone for a few seconds, feeling both confused and thoughtful. This world is really interesting. There are actually people lining up to be my friend. This treatment was certainly a novelty. He wondered how long those two would stick around. Without thinking too much about it, Komaeda Nagito checked his inbox again, confirmed that there were no urgent mails, and dialed a number. The call connected quickly. "Komaeda-san, you finally called me." The person on the other end sounded excited. "It hasn't even been 10 days yet. Have you changed your mind?" Komaeda Nagito had dialed the number of the representative from Tei Corporation's insurance company, the one who had come to him previously asking for a deferment of the compensation payment. Back then, Komaeda had said he wanted to join the secret gambling ship operation run by the chairman of Tei Corporation. The representative hadn't agreed to that condition, and the negotiations had ended without resolution. However, Komaeda Nagito mentioned that in 10 days, the representative might change his mind, although the implication was that the representative, not Komaeda, would change his mind. Nonetheless, the representative had held on to a shred of hope. He hadn't expected Komaeda Nagito to call him back in less than half that time. However, the response Komaeda Nagito gave wasn't what the representative had hoped for. "No, I haven't changed my mind. I still want to board your gambling ship that's said to gather countless souls of despair. This time, I'm calling because there's new information." The representative immediately felt a sense of dread. "What new information? Do you watch the news? Have you heard about the recent incident on Reigo Island?" Of course I've been watching the news. With the phone's good audio quality, you can clearly hear the news in the background. The representative struggled to speak, and after a long pause, he asked hesitantly, "Could it be that, Komaeda-san, you?" Komaeda Nagito kindly confirmed, "Yes, I went to Reigo Island for a vacation, and I was kidnapped." The representative. We're doomed. The representative couldn't help but think negatively. Already, Komaeda Nagito had been kidnapped 3 times in 1 year. According to the strange kidnapping insurance contract, the amount of compensation they were required to pay had become astronomical. Now there was a 4th kidnapping incident, and it wasn't just a matter of multiplying the compensation. With that contract, after being kidnapped 3 times, the upper management of the insurance company had likely already been scolded, and they might have been reassigned to other departments. But with a 4th kidnapping, the entire department's performance would be ruined, and it would be understandable if everyone got fired. The representative was already imagining himself being fired, living on the streets, his family leaving him, and his elderly father disowning him. But then Komaeda Nagito's voice brought him back to reality. "You didn't agree to my request last time, but how about now?" Komaeda Nagito asked cheerfully. "I could retract the 2nd and 3rd kidnapping claims this year, as well as this most recent one, in exchange for a spot on the ship. How about that? Would you be willing to submit my name now?" Komaeda Nagito had never faked any of his previous kidnappings, and this time it had even made the news, so it definitely couldn't be a lie. Given the mounting work pressure, the representative had to seriously consider Komaeda's request. Not wanting to lose his job, the representative took a deep breath. "I understand. Please give me a day." He no longer tried to persuade Komaeda Nagito. Even though he believed that spending so much money for a chance to potentially fall into ruin wasn't worth it, that was Komaeda Nagito's decision to make. As an outsider, the representative had done his best, and besides, agreeing to this would benefit him as well. Saving the company such a large amount of money would not only prevent him from losing his job but also almost guarantee him a promotion. The only complication was that he had already submitted the list of participants, and making a last-minute change would require approval from his superiors. However, he was confident that as long as his bosses didn't want to lose their jobs too, they would agree. "Alright," Komaeda Nagito said, "I'll wait for your good news." Komaeda Nagito had a feeling that his request would go through this time. There's no other choice. He firmly believed that hope is born from despair, but in this world, finding a place where despair gathers and hope can emerge was extremely difficult. After searching through so much information, this ship called Hope was the only thing that even remotely resembled his idea. But before that, I guess I should go to the hospital for a checkup. Komaeda Nagito said to himself, casually calling to make an appointment. Even though it's only been a month since my last checkup. Although Komaeda Nagito often experienced headaches, he wasn't too worried about his physical health because he regularly underwent health checkups. It wasn't that he enjoyed health exams or was a hypochondriac, it was that Yaoi Corporation's insurance company seemed to care more about his health than he did. Every year, they arranged a mandatory checkup for him, and after each kidnapping, they would also drag him in for another health check to make sure there were no lasting effects. As a VIP client, Komaeda could even choose his preferred hospital for these checkups. Ironically, while the Yaoi insurance department probably wanted Komaeda dead more than anyone, their formal procedures were always highly considerate. After all, they were a big company and had to maintain a good public image. What they schemed behind the scenes was another matter entirely. After all, having a healthy body doesn't stop kidnappers from killing their hostages. The head of Yaoi Corporation's insurance department darkly thought so. In any case, after handling the issues that arose from his trip to Reigo Island, Komaeda Nagito was finally able to relax, wash up, and go to bed, ready to face the next day. However, as expected, the repercussions from the Reigo Island incident didn't end after just one day. The next morning, Komaeda Nagito's home received an unexpected visitor. "Good morning, I'm from the Special Division of Unusual Powers." The person at the door flashed an ID that Komaeda Nagito hadn't seen before. "May I come in and talk?" "Please, come in." The visitor declined any tea or refreshments and spoke in a firm tone. "I assume, having been caught up in the Reigo Island incident and even transformed into a cat, that you're aware of the existence of special abilities, correct?" Komaeda Nagito nodded. As someone from Yokohama, he had already known about this for a while. The Special Division agent, unaware of Komaeda Nagito's inner thoughts, continued according to protocol. "Good, then I'll get straight to the point. Regarding the events on Reigo Island, how much do you know? Please explain everything in detail." Komaeda Nagito squinted slightly. This request for detailed information was a bit telling. It seemed that Ayatsuji-sensei had been rather vague when discussing his part in the incident. So, Komaeda Nagito chose to only mention what he felt was appropriate, avoiding the specifics about Ayatsuji Yukido's explanation of another, the ability that could cause criminals to die by accident. Instead, he simply described how those people had died due to various accidents. The Special Division agent, thinking himself thorough, tested Komaeda Nagito a bit. Convinced that Komaeda Nagito genuinely didn't know the full truth, he was satisfied and pulled out a confidentiality agreement. "Due to some reasons that can't be easily explained, I need you to keep everything that happened on Reigo Island confidential. If anyone asks, just say that you were kidnapped on the first day and know nothing, and that you were rescued later. Understand? This is not a joke. Even though you're a minor, you should know what to say and what not to say, right? If you reveal anything, we'll know, and I believe you've taken out kidnapping insurance, right? We can reveal all the relevant information as proof." Hearing this subtle warning about the seriousness of the situation, along with the implication that they had already investigated him and knew about his insurance, Komaeda Nagito calmly signed his name. Understood. For an ordinary 15-year-old without parents or any kind of support, offending a government department would likely mean the end of them. But for Komaeda Nagito, he wasn't staying silent because of the agreement, but because he had his own plans. The Special Division agent, satisfied with the signed agreement, left feeling that this child, lacking parental guidance, had matured early. The boy showed no discomfort or defiance during their conversation. He was a smart kid and would likely stick to the agreement. The agent felt that his mission had gone smoothly. He had read Komaeda Nagito's file before coming. The kid sure had bad luck, constantly getting kidnapped because of his massive fortune. However, this time, he had probably been implicated because of Ayatsuji Yukido. If he hadn't gone with such a suspicious detective, there's a good chance he would have had a normal vacation. It didn't matter, though. Soon enough, the boy would have to move and get away from that dangerous detective. After seeing the Special Division agent off, Komaeda Nagito immediately called Ayatsuji Yukido. Yesterday, Ayatsuji-sensei had been adamant about avoiding contact, but now it should be fine, right? After a short delay, the call connected. "Komaeda-kun," Ayatsuji Yukido greeted curtly, "Do you need something?" "The Special Division came to see me." "They came to see me too. Just listen to them. They won't harm you." Ayatsuji Yukido's voice was detached, as though he was deliberately keeping a distance from Komaeda. But they were never particularly close to begin with. "Your luggage is still at my place. Remember to come get it. Is there anything else?" Though Ayatsuji Yukido didn't say much directly, Komaeda Nagito could read between the lines. "No, I'll come back to Tokyo in a couple of days." "Alright, see you." Komaeda Nagito pondered for a moment. That detached tone. Ayatsuji-sensei must be under surveillance, right? Especially after the recent incident, the surveillance would be even stricter. The phone was probably being tapped. The Special Division was really a hassle. For someone as talented as Ayatsuji-sensei, instead of helping him find a better place to use his abilities and realize his full potential, they were focusing on all this. However, Komaeda Nagito could guess the shady reasoning behind it. The higher-ups were probably worried that if Ayatsuji-sensei discovered something about them, he could endanger them all. How disgusting. So, what now? Komaeda Nagito thought for a moment and sighed deeply. Looks like I need to find a new place to live again. The fact that he had called Ayatsuji-sensei's office number, not his mobile, and that the call went through, meant that Ayatsuji-sensei hadn't moved. The special division likely wasn't planning to relocate Ayatsuji-sensei yet but had probably increased surveillance and monitoring. As for Komaeda Nagito's own apartment, it was probably the best place for surveillance. The special division wouldn't miss the chance. It was only a matter of time before his landlord came up with an excuse to ask him to leave. The problem was, finding another suitable apartment in Baika, one that would work for school, wasn't easy. After years of living there, he knew the area well. First, he had to rule out the apartments he'd rented in the past but had been blacklisted from due to various incidents. Then, he'd exclude the ones for sale but not for rent, as well as those that only rented to seniors. Lastly, he had to cross off any buildings that were too old or unsuitable. Not many options remained. Komaeda Nagito went online to search for rental listings, but since the apartment he was currently in was recently rented and was the most suitable option, the listings he found were mostly the same ones he had already dismissed in the past due to being unsatisfactory. This became quite troublesome. Either he'd have to buy a place, or he could stay at a hotel for a few years. That wasn't entirely out of the question. As Komaeda Nagito was busy browsing apartment listings, another call came in. In fact, over the past 2 days, he had received more phone calls than he typically got in a whole year, including the usual telemarketing calls. The caller was his junior, Kudo Shinichi. Kudo-kun. Kudo Shinichi had spent the entire night investigating the Reigo Island incident, and the more he dug, the more intrigued he became. Since the case had blown up into something big, Kudo Shinichi figured the police wouldn't take long before silencing the involved parties. Based on the timing, he assumed Komaeda Nagito was probably in the clear by now, so he quickly called to see if there was anything he could share. "Senpai, did the police come?" "They've already left," Komaeda Nagito replied. "If you want to ask about Reigo Island, I can only tell you that I was kidnapped as soon as I arrived and don't know anything." This explanation clearly didn't fool Kudo Shinichi. From the way Komaeda-senpai phrased it, he could tell that there were many things Komaeda-senpai wasn't allowed to discuss, and the police must have given him a script to follow. "All right then," Kudo Shinichi said with some regret. "I won't press you about it. By the way, have you gone for a health check?" Due to Komaeda-senpai's family situation, Kudo Shinichi always felt it was necessary to remind his senpai to take care of his health, especially since there wasn't anyone around to look after him if something went wrong. "I've scheduled an appointment, but I haven't gone yet. I'm currently looking for a new apartment." Kudo Shinichi was surprised. "Looking for an apartment? Why? Are you planning to move?" Komaeda Nagito didn't beat around the bush. "I just have a feeling that in the next couple of days, someone will ask me to move. I'm looking in advance because finding a place to rent is quite troublesome." Although Komaeda Nagito spoke vaguely, Kudo Shinichi had a good idea of the reason behind it. Having researched Komaeda-senpai's background, he was quite familiar with the challenges Komaeda-senpai faced when renting a place. Thinking about Komaeda-senpai's social circle, Kudo Shinichi realized that he might be the only one who could offer any help. After some hesitation, he asked, "Senpai, if you can't find a place right away, would you consider staying at my house for the time being? I'm the only one living here right now." Chapter 23 End. Chapter 24, Encountering an Assassin at the Hospital. Komaeda Nagito was surprised upon hearing this. Kudo Shinichi really is the epitome of a good person. He politely declined the offer. "Thank you, but I don't need it right now. If my landlord actually kicks me out and I still can't find a place, I'll ask for your help then, Kudo-kun." Kudo Shinichi wasn't offended by the rejection. "All right, when that time comes, I'll help you ask around." Sigh, Kudo Shinichi thought to himself. This senpai of mine probably had to be independent from a young age, so he's not used to accepting help from others. After chatting a bit more, the conversation ended with Kudo Shinichi reminding Komaeda Nagito to remember his health checkup. Before hanging up, Komaeda Nagito laughed. Aside from the insurance company, Kudo-kun is the person who's cared the most about me since my parents died. At 14 years old, living with a perfect family, with kind neighbors, Kudo Shinichi. Senpai's life is way worse than I imagined. His neighbors are that cold? Well, his senpai did mostly live in Tokyo, renting houses, and frequently moving. There wasn't much that could be done. Kudo Shinichi hung up the phone, feeling conflicted, and sighed deeply. His senpai seemed perfectly fine living by himself, but Kudo Shinichi couldn't help but wonder if his concern might come across as condescending. He resolved to be more mindful in the future. While Kudo Shinichi continued pondering the balance between helping others and respecting their independence, Komaeda Nagito's response was much more straightforward. He calmly collected some cash and a spare key from his house and set out for the hospital for his checkup. The weather forecast had mentioned a typhoon in Yokohama for the next couple of days, but the report had reassured that daily activities wouldn't be affected. Everything had seemed normal on his way home yesterday, so after some thought, Komaeda Nagito decided to keep his appointment and just leave the house a little earlier as a precaution. As a result, he arrived at the hospital much earlier than expected. Tei Corporation, being a financial giant in Japan, also had investments in the hospital Komaeda Nagito frequented. As a VIP client, he was greeted by the familiar receptionist as soon as he entered. "Oh, Komaeda-kun, you're a bit early today," the receptionist remarked in surprise. Komaeda Nagito replied casually, "I heard there's a typhoon today, so I left the house earlier than planned. Didn't expect to catch all green lights on the way." The receptionist checked the schedule. "Your first checkup. The doctor is currently treating a patient on another floor. Could you wait upstairs? The room's the same as usual." "Alright." Komaeda Nagito had no objections and made his way to the elevator. On his way, he ran into another familiar doctor. "Back for another checkup, Komaeda-kun?" This doctor specialized in surgery, and he'd treated Komaeda Nagito for various injuries like fractures from car accidents. Japan didn't encourage hopping from doctor to doctor, so this doctor had essentially watched Komaeda Nagito grow up, and they were on familiar terms. After a moment's hesitation, the doctor gave him a warning. "Be careful. The floor you're heading to has some people from the port mafia. They've cleared out the other patients, and the atmosphere's not great. Stay away from them and head straight to your room once you get up there." Komaeda Nagito smiled and thanked him. "Got it, thank you." "No problem. I wouldn't worry about most people, but with your luck." The doctor trailed off, worried that even if Komaeda Nagito stayed still, he might still end up getting hurt. "Just be careful." "But hey, this is a hospital. Worst case scenario, we've got doctors everywhere." Komaeda understood the unspoken concern. "That's true, haha." As a VIP client of Tei Corporation, Komaeda Nagito had access to a special floor reserved for such patients. However, since he wasn't the kind of VIP who demanded constant pampering, he shared the floor with other clients, meaning he didn't have an entire wing to himself with staff constantly at his beck and call. When the elevator stopped at the VIP floor, as soon as the doors opened, Komaeda Nagito was greeted by a shrill, piercing female voice echoing through the hallway. "You actually got her pregnant? What does she have that I don't? She's 5 years older than you. Have you lost your mind? Divorce. I want divorce. You think your business partners are working with you because of you? Half of them only care because of my family. You." Komaeda Nagito. Was this the port mafia? It sounded more like some sort of domestic dispute. Komaeda wasn't particularly interested in such trivial matters, but the next moment, a name reached his ears. "Oda Sakunosuke. The port mafia didn't send you here to stand around like an idiot." Komaeda Nagito's eyes lit up, and he quickened his pace, turning the corner just in time to witness the commotion unfolding with 4 people in a chaotic scene. Oda Sakanosuke, no doubt about it. That name belonged to another world's literary figure, but in this world. If he's in the port mafia, that means he's involved in the underworld. Komaeda Nagito thought back to the other literary names he'd encountered: Dazai Osamu, Nakahara Chuya, Oda Sakanosuke. There was also the woman Dazai referred to as Koyone-san, whom Komaeda Nagito suspected was Ozaki Koyo, though Ozaki Koyo was supposed to be male. He wasn't sure yet. But looking at the confirmed literary figures he'd encountered so far, Komaeda Nagito still couldn't understand. Why did all these authors end up joining the mafia? Was this some bizarre law of this world? While pondering this strange phenomenon, Komaeda Nagito approached the group of people in the hallway. One glance was enough to identify Oda Sakanosuke. First, he ruled out the large, sweating, overweight man standing in front of a mature woman who radiated a sense of sophistication. The portly man looked both frustrated and anxious. He was likely the subject of the argument. "It was an accident, just like you said. I just thought she looked a lot like my late mother, so I visited her. Then I accidentally got drunk. And she's pregnant at her age, it's not easy for her. An abortion could hurt her." The woman, presumably his wife, wore an expression of utter disgust. "Are you insane? She looks like your mother, and you still went through with it. I don't want my child to have such a disgusting half-sibling." The red-haired young man who didn't seem to fit into this situation awkwardly tried to mediate. "Everyone here is pregnant, it's better if we sit down and talk. It'll be better for your health." The middle-aged man with the large belly looked desperate. "Why would the port mafia send someone like you to handle this?" "I'm going to file a complaint. I'll definitely file a complaint." Komaeda Nagito. He also wanted to ask, why? Was the head of the port mafia blind? How could they have Oda Sakanosuke handle such a boring job? Yes, even though it was Komaeda Nagito's first time seeing this world's Oda Sakanosuke and he had no idea if the man had any special abilities, his instincts told him immediately that this red-haired young man was no ordinary person. Back in his original world, Komaeda Nagito had gathered intelligence on countless talents because of his admiration for Hope's Peak Academy. This included elite soldiers, expert assassins, and others. Based on posture and demeanor alone, Komaeda Nagito could sense that Oda Sakanosuke wasn't an ordinary person. He was certain of it. As Komaeda Nagito approached the group, the domestic dispute seemed to escalate even further. The wife had started pulling random items out of her bag and throwing them at the man across from her. The sheer volume of items emerging from such a small purse made Komaeda Nagito wonder if the bag was somehow connected to an alternate dimension. And clearly not having any talent for resolving disputes, Oda Sakanosuke remained quietly on the sidelines, suggesting, "This is dangerous. Please stop. Getting too emotional isn't good for the baby." As Komaeda Nagito drew closer, Oda Sakanosuke, who had been largely ignored by the others, suddenly looked up at him. Without warning, he grabbed the woman who had been throwing things and, with impressive agility, pulled the other three people toward Komaeda Nagito, tackling him to the ground and shielding him with their bodies. All of a sudden, Komaeda Nagito found himself bearing the weight of 4 adults, 2 of whom were pregnant, and struggled to breathe. He suspected one of his ribs might have cracked. Gasping for air, Komaeda Nagito coughed a few times but didn't have time to ask what was happening before. In the next moment, the large window shattered, and the howling sound of the wind filled the room. A typhoon. Komaeda Nagito suddenly recalled the typhoon warnings he'd seen. But wasn't it supposed to have no impact on daily life? The middle-aged man seemed to share his confusion. A typhoon. Could it really have blown the window out? Did the hospital skimp on construction materials for the glass? Initially shocked and highly suspicious of what Oda Sakanosuke intended to do, but after the window shatters, the 2 pregnant women clung tightly to the people next to them, refusing to get up, fearing they'd be blown away by the wind. Oda Sakanosuke, who had no choice but to remain on the ground with them, sighed and explained, "The wind isn't strong enough to do this." something must have been blown into the window to break the glass. But yeah, the quality probably wasn't great. Could you all let go of me? Komaeda Nagito, struggling to breathe beneath them, added weakly, could you also get off of me? Four grown adults, two of them pregnant, had tackled him at full speed, and the feeling was far from pleasant. Sorry. Oda Sakanosuke skillfully extricated himself and tried to help the others up. I don't have much experience with pregnant women. I'll go call a doctor. But the two women, now fully aware of the discomfort in their bodies, began clutching their stomachs and crying out in pain, refusing to move. The overweight middle-aged man was pulled to his feet and anxiously hovered around the two women, looking lost. Komaeda Nagito. This was too unlucky. Could it be that this was yet another case of a literary figure's misfortune rubbing off on him? This was just painful. Can they calmly got up sooner? Not one to give up easily, Oda Sakanosuke managed to find an angle and finally pulled Komaeda Nagito out from under the group, apologizing profusely as he did a quick check to make sure Komaeda Nagito was alright. Sorry about that. They kicked all the doctors off this floor earlier during their argument, but I pressed the emergency button. A doctor should be here soon. Does this hurt? Komaeda Nagito winced. It does. And how about here? Bear with it for a second. How about now? Komaeda Nagito assessed the pain. It's a bit better. Oda Sakanosuke finally breathed a sigh of relief. Doesn't seem like anything's broken. You'll just need to rest for a while. We'll have a doctor check on you when they get here. You seem pretty familiar with this stuff, Komaeda Nagito commented, despite the pain. His focus was no longer on his injuries but on the person helping him. His eyes shone as he looked at Oda Sakanosuke. Your name's Oda Sakanosuke, right? Were you a doctor before? Oda Sakanosuke shook his head, no. Komaeda Nagito was a bit disappointed. You weren't a doctor, but you're still this skilled? That's such a waste. Why are you doing this boring work? You clearly have the ability to do something much more meaningful. Your boss must really lack vision. Oda Sakanosuke found this boy's fixation a bit odd. After thinking about it for a moment, he responded, I'm the one who doesn't want a promotion. I'm fine just being an ordinary employee. Komaeda Nagito looked at him in disbelief. Why? Oda Sakanosuke didn't answer, instead continuing to check Komaeda for other injuries. After a brief silence, Komaeda Nagito suddenly spoke. Earlier, before the glass shattered, you seemed to know something was about to happen, didn't you? Under normal circumstances, we all should have been injured by the shards. Oda Sakanosuke looked at him. Komaeda Nagito's green eyes stared intently at the red-haired man, his pupils dilated slightly. You can see the future. Oda Sakanosuke was genuinely surprised this time. He didn't answer directly, instead saying, You're very observant. Most people wouldn't notice something like that in such a situation. They'd be too focused on the fact that they were unharmed. But there was one thing this boy had gotten wrong. Oda's ability, flawless, could indeed see danger 5 to 6 seconds into the future. But the future he saw wasn't everyone being injured by the shattered glass. In the future he saw, the others would have been lightly scratched by the glass shards, while this boy was the one who would have been gravely injured by a piece of stone blown in by the typhoon, striking him in the head. Out of everyone, this boy was the unluckiest, fated to be hurt the worst. At that moment, the doctors who had been kicked out earlier finally returned. One of them recognized Komaeda Nagito and was visibly alarmed. Komaeda-kun. Are you alright? Komaeda-kun. Oda Sakanosuke suddenly felt the name sounded familiar. After thinking about it for a moment, he remembered where he had heard it. Ah, Dazai mentioned you. Komaeda Nagito's spirits immediately lifted. You know Dazai-kun? Yes. Komaeda Nagito wasn't at all surprised by this. After all, in the other world, Oda Sakanosuke and Dazai Osamu had been friends. It seemed odd, though, that a low-ranking member of the port mafia would know someone like Dazai Osamu, who was on the verge of becoming a mafia executive. That fact alone spoke volumes. Someone with Dazai Osamu's personality wouldn't befriend just anyone. This meant Oda Sakanosuke definitely had something special that caught Dazai Osamu's attention. Just as Komaeda Nagito was about to ask more questions, the doctor who had replaced Oda Sakanosuke began checking him for injuries, and the sudden pain left him unable to speak. Komaeda Nagito hissed in pain, "I originally came for a checkup." The doctor was equally exasperated. "You came for a checkup and ended up like this? You really are unlucky. Next time, come a bit later so I can be ready for you." The VIP doctors didn't stay on this floor permanently, they had offices downstairs. They only came up when a VIP patient arrived. Today's events had happened at the worst possible time, with Komaeda Nagito's doctor and the others being chased off the floor right when he arrived. Luckily, this doctor came to the same conclusion as Oda Sakanosuke, "Nothing serious. Walk around a bit and see how you feel. We'll do a scan later to make sure." Komaeda Nagito smiled wryly as he got to his feet. The two pregnant women were now surrounded by a group of doctors and nurses, while the middle-aged man was left awkwardly pacing around them. Oda Sakanosuke didn't want to cause more trouble, so he helped Komaeda Nagito walk around the hallway to test his movement. Looking at the silent Oda Sakanosuke, Komaeda Nagito asked, "Why aren't you over there? Isn't that your job?" "I don't think I'm suited for that kind of work," Oda Sakanosuke replied calmly. "They barely even noticed you were there. Are you used to downplaying your presence?" "Ah." Oda Sakanosuke seemed to realize the issue for the first time. "That's a habit from my time as an assassin." Komaeda Nagito was taken aback. He hadn't expected such a straightforward answer. Oda Sakanosuke had figured there was no point in hiding it. For various reasons, he might as well be upfront about it. The idea that Oda Sakanosuke had once been an assassin was one of the possibilities Komaeda Nagito had considered. His movements and habits were too different from normal people, and even from the regular members of the port mafia that Komaeda Nagito had observed. But why would a former assassin be handling something as mundane as resolving a family dispute between a major business partner and his wife? Komaeda Nagito couldn't resist asking, "Did you switch careers because you weren't good at it?" "No." Oda Sakanosuke looked at Komaeda Nagito, sensing that there was no harm in answering honestly. "I stopped because I didn't want to kill anymore." Komaeda Nagito immediately understood. "I see, that's why you're stuck doing this kind of work in the port mafia." The port mafia was still the mafia, after all. If you weren't willing to kill, your career advancement would definitely hit a ceiling. "So are you planning to stay like this forever?" Komaeda Nagito asked, disappointed. "Don't you have anything else you want to do, any other job you want?" Though Oda Sakanosuke didn't respond, Komaeda Nagito had already guessed. It seemed likely that Oda Sakanosuke's ability was foresight, and yet, despite possessing such a powerful ability, he was content to remain a low-ranking member of the port mafia. What a waste of potential, completely unworthy of expectation. Oda Sakanosuke didn't get angry at Komaeda Nagito's slightly disrespectful tone, he was more curious than anything. "This should be our first time meeting, right? Why are you so concerned about my job? What do you think I should be doing instead?" Komaeda Nagito was momentarily at a loss for words. He wasn't familiar with the Oda Sakanosuke of this world, and since the man clearly didn't want to continue being an assassin, Komaeda Nagito didn't have any concrete advice to offer. In the original world, Komaeda Nagito's answer would have been simple: Oda Sakanosuke should write novels. But in this world, it wasn't even clear if Oda Sakanosuke had finished school, and he might not have any interest in becoming a novelist. However, based on Komaeda Nagito's observations over the past few days, certain writers from the previous world, like Conan Doyle, still wrote Sherlock Holmes, and even Natsume Soseki was inexplicably still alive and publishing novels. So, perhaps. Especially since Komaeda Nagito noticed a book sticking out of Oda Sakanosuke's coat pocket. It looked like literary fiction, not light reading. Holding onto a sliver of hope, he asked, "Are you interested in writing novels?" Oda Sakanosuke paused, stopping Komaeda Nagito as well. They turned to look at each other. For the first time, a ripple of emotion appeared in Oda Sakanosuke's normally calm eyes. "Did Dazai tell you that?" "No, I just thought that since you enjoy reading, maybe you could try writing something yourself. Who knows? You might have a talent for it." Oda Sakanosuke followed Komaeda Nagito's gaze to his coat pocket, and suddenly understood. "I do enjoy reading." He thought for a moment and then, speaking to the boy he had only just met, he added, "I've also considered writing a novel. But right now, I need to support my family, and the money from working with the port mafia is quicker." Komaeda Nagito hadn't expected such a pleasant surprise. If Oda Sakanosuke were willing to leave behind his dead-end job to become a novelist, wouldn't that be a way to indirectly encourage the blossoming of hope? Immediately, Komaeda Nagito said, "That doesn't have to be a conflict. You could use your free time after work to write." "No." Oda Sakanosuke didn't know why he was explaining so much to this person. It was probably because the other party had an attitude like, "If you don't go write novels, it would truly be a waste, you're bound to succeed," which made him curious about where this strange young man's confidence in him was coming from. "I mainly want to finish a novel I read that had no ending, but I've been thinking about it for a long time and can't come up with a good plot. It's hard to start." Komaeda Nagito sighed deeply. "Oda-san, would you like me to recommend some books about writing for you? I've already read quite a few." "Then you should know this." With a mix of exasperation and mild scorn in his tone, Komaeda Nagito said, "If you want to become a novelist, just thinking about it isn't enough. You at least need to start by picking up a pen and writing something down." Chapter 24 End. Chapter 25, Amuro's Dinner. "So, you met Komaeda-kun at the hospital today?" That night, inside Lupin's bar, Dazai Osamu widened his eyes in surprise and said, "Isn't that quite the coincidence?" "Not really," Oda Sakanosuke thought for a moment. "He was there for a health checkup, and I was accompanying the target of my mission for their checkup." "And after that, you went to buy those things?" Sakaguchi Ongo's gaze fell on the plastic bag on the table, which contained a stack of manuscript paper and a fountain pen with ink, among other items. Oda Sakanosuke nodded. "Because I read in a book that if you're struggling to find inspiration, you can try creating a sense of ceremony by separating your everyday stationery from the one specifically used for writing novels." Dazai Osamu, acting like a curious cat, fiddled with the plastic bag. "Looks like you bought quite a bit. So, are you really planning to start writing?" "Chasing the perfect idea is the greatest enemy of action," Komaeda-kun said something like that. Oda Sakanosuke spoke seriously. "I thought about it, and I realized it's true. No matter what, the first step is to start writing. If I'm not satisfied, I can always go back and revise it later." "Ah," Dazai Osamu asked with great interest. "So, what do you plan to write?" "I haven't decided yet." Oda Sakanosuke said as he pulled out his phone and opened an email. "Komaeda-kun helped me gather some prompts for practice, so I'll probably pick one from here." Dazai Osamu took the phone, and Sakaguchi Ongo leaned over to look as well. "Write a story that begins with, 'Today, he died,' or another one that starts with, 'This is exactly what he wanted,' and ends with, 'No, what he truly wanted was,' or imagine what the world will be like 100 years from now." The email contained about 100 prompts, each a single sentence or a short passage, designed to spark creative inspiration. If, after reading all of these, you still can't find any ideas or don't know what to write and your mind is completely blank, you might want to consider giving up on writing. That's what Komaeda-kun wrote at the end of the email. After reading this, Sakaguchi Ongo couldn't help but remark, "That guy really doesn't hold back when talking to his elders." Komaeda-kun sometimes does that, Dazio-samu laughed. For Komaeda-kun, he doesn't automatically respect someone just because they're older. So, Oda-saku, when you met Komaeda-kun today, did something happen that caught his attention? Ah, speaking of that, Oda Sakanosuke suddenly remembered, it seemed like he figured out my ability. He's kind of like you, Dazai, that kid. Sakaguchi Ongo was so shocked that his glasses almost fell off. He quickly adjusted them and asked, "Really? Like Dazai? In what way? He's really smart." Oda Sakanosuke pondered. "It's hard to explain, it's more of a feeling." Dazio-samu felt slightly uncomfortable with this topic. He had been interested in hearing Oda Sakanosuke's story, but now he decided to shift the conversation, offering his own guess. So basically, Oda-saku had an unexpected encounter today and ended up revealing his ability to Komaeda-kun, right? What else did you two talk about, career planning? Yes, he seemed to have some opinions about my current job, Oda Sakanosuke replied calmly. Dazio-samu couldn't help but laugh. Of course, he'd have opinions. I used to wonder why you insisted on staying at the bottom for so long. Sakaguchi Ongo nodded in agreement. That's right, makes sense. Oda Sakanosuke. Despite the joking tone, Dazio-samu found himself recalling some details. Now that he thought about it, when Komaeda Nagito saw him at that family-run restaurant, he had asked him something similar. When will your book be out? Does Komaeda Nagito have some kind of fixation with writers? While Oda Sakanosuke was at the bar drinking with his friends and talking about Komaeda Nagito himself was at the supermarket buying a bento. After his health checkup had finished, a few scrapes and bruises were treated on the spot, leaving Komaeda Nagito smelling of medicine. As for the health report, the doctor had already reviewed it with him and mentioned. From the initial results, there doesn't seem to be any issues. However, there are a few tests that will take a few more days to process. Where should we send the final report? Tokyo or Yokohama? Komaeda Nagito obediently replied, Yokohama. The Tokyo address was inconvenient for deliveries lately, and he would probably have to move soon. Once he got home, he'd need to continue looking for rental listings. Sigh. Buying a house is a hassle, and as a minor, all the paperwork would become even more complicated. It wasn't something that could simply be solved by hiring someone to handle it, he'd have to do a lot of it himself. Renting was far more convenient. Lost in thought about the best course of action, Komaeda Nagito was browsing the chilled section for a bento. Suddenly, a familiar voice spoke behind him. Komaeda-kun. Komaeda Nagito turned around and saw Amuro Toru, the man who claimed to be a folklore scholar, smiling as he greeted him. As he approached, Amuro Toru seemed to catch the scent of medicine on Komaeda Nagito and raised an eyebrow. You're injured again. This blonde man, who clearly harbored some secrets but exuded a friendly aura, asked kindly. Komaeda Nagito responded, Yes, there was a small accident during my health checkup today. A glass window suddenly shattered. Amuro Toru's gaze became a bit more complicated. How does someone end up getting hurt while going for a health checkup? His luck is just too terrible. With a sigh, Amuro Toru felt an inexplicable sense of worry. His subordinates had already gathered information about Komaeda Nagito for him. As a police investigator, Amuro Toru had access to incredibly detailed intelligence. He now understood much of Komaeda Nagito's recent history, including the incident where Komaeda Nagito had used Dazio-samu's phone to report a crime. Amuro Toru had initially thought that Komaeda Nagito was simply caught up in Ayatsuji Yukito's affairs, but after reviewing the detailed information, he realized that Komaeda Nagito might just be a naturally unlucky person. However, given the circumstances, it was difficult to predict whether Komaeda Nagito's future would turn around with good fortune or not. As a Japanese police officer, despite being undercover within the black organization, Amuro Toru still felt a responsibility to look after his fellow citizens when it was safe to do so. Seeing Komaeda Nagito reeking of medicine, Amuro Toru considered offering his assistance. There wasn't much need to ask, though. Seeing Komaeda Nagito browsing the supermarket, Amuro Toru had already guessed, "You haven't had dinner yet, have you?" "No, I was about to buy a bento," Komaeda Nagito replied. Amuro Toru rubbed his chin in thought. "Would you like to come over to my place for dinner? I also have something I'd like to ask someone who's more familiar with Yokohama." As a mature adult, Amuro Toru knew how strong the pride of a young person could be. Although Komaeda Nagito didn't seem to fit that mold, just in case, Amuro Toru avoided making it seem like he was offering help. Instead, he framed it as if he needed Komaeda Nagito's assistance. This way, even if Komaeda Nagito realized the truth, he wouldn't refuse the offer out of pride. Besides, Amuro Toru really did have a few questions for someone who knew Yokohama well, especially someone with knowledge of the port mafia. Komaeda Nagito was an ideal person to ask. As expected, Komaeda Nagito didn't refuse. "No problem. As long as it's something I know, I'll tell you." And so, the two made their way to Amuro Toru's rented apartment. "You rent an apartment here?" Komaeda Nagito asked, somewhat surprised. "Are you planning to stay in Yokohama long-term?" Amuro Toru replied, "I prefer living in an apartment. It helps me relax." The real reason, of course, was that he carried too many things that shouldn't be seen by ordinary people. Staying in a hotel, even with strict privacy policies, posed too much of a risk. An apartment was much safer. Amuro Toru turned on the TV. "You can watch some TV while I cook. Does beef rice with hot spring eggs sound okay? Any dietary restrictions?" "None," Komaeda Nagito replied. "Komaeda-kun is really easy to take care of," Amuro Toru remarked. "If I have to be honest, I don't like eating things that don't taste good." Komaeda Nagito replied. Amuro Toru chuckled. "Don't worry, I'm quite confident in my cooking." Komaeda Nagito, intrigued by Amuro Toru's confident attitude, looked forward to the meal. While Komaeda Nagito sat watching TV, waiting for Amuro Toru to finish preparing dinner, his phone rang. It was the sunglasses-wearing man from Tei Corporation's insurance department. "Komaeda-san," the man said, his tone serious, but with a hint of relief, "your request has been approved. If it's convenient, could you come by to finalize the contract?" After all, Komaeda Nagito's decision to forego the massive insurance payout was shocking. Most people would have second thoughts, especially since Komaeda Nagito wanted to board the Hope ship, a place notorious for its gambling. It wasn't far-fetched to imagine someone gambling away hundreds of millions, then trying to backtrack on their decision. The insurance department couldn't afford to take that risk. Komaeda Nagito easily guessed what Tei Corporation was worried about. He had no intention of regretting his choices. Still, it was understandable that the company had concerns, so he readily agreed to finalize the contract. The man on the other end immediately sighed with relief. As long as Komaeda Nagito was willing to sign the contract, everything would be fine. His superiors were highly invested in this transaction because if it went through, and provided Komaeda Nagito wasn't kidnapped 3 more times within the next 6 months, the savings from not having to pay out would be enough to make their annual performance the best in a decade. The whole department would likely be praised by the company. Promotions might not be out of reach either. When the man had first reported the situation, his superiors had repeatedly asked for confirmation, their disbelief and excitement evident. No one outside the department knew how tough things had been for them. After the recent war, everyone was more cautious, especially those with families to support. It was the perfect time to sell insurance. Even if people didn't buy it for the whole family, they'd at least purchase a policy for the primary moneymaker. In case of an unexpected death, at least the family wouldn't have to immediately worry about financial struggles. As it turned out, all the efforts to persuade people to protect themselves were futile. The harsh reality was that in modern times, human nature wasn't what it used to be. Even the smallest incidents could lead to someone's death, especially in Tokyo, where the mortality rate seemed indistinguishable from wartime levels, leaving people baffled. Tei Corporation's insurance department had been constantly revising their strategies, holding meeting after meeting, running all kinds of statistical projections. Ultimately, they concluded with pessimism that as long as Komaida Nagito existed, making big profits was out of the question. They focused instead on selling stable, low-risk policies to recoup past losses, hoping crime rates in Tokyo would eventually decline. The department's head would anxiously watch the news every day, terrified that one day the government would officially confirm the existence of aliens and announce that extraterrestrials were indeed on Earth. The only truly profitable policy left was alien abduction insurance. If aliens were proven real, their risk factor would skyrocket, making it a gold mine. In short, Komaida Nagito's sudden decision to forego the insurance payout filled the department with an overwhelming sense of joy, as if they were finally getting a break. Yet, because the decision wasn't finalized, they still felt pressure, afraid of celebrating too soon. Once the contract was signed, the higher-ups would likely give everyone a bonus. After all, it would be the first time they'd ever made money from Komaida Nagito. The thought was bittersweet. After setting a time and place to meet, the insurance company naturally wouldn't offer Komaida Nagito much help in delivering the documents. That's why sometimes Komaida Nagito had to handle it himself. However, this time, the man in sunglasses was so eager that he offered to personally bring the contract to Komaida Nagito's home for signing. The last thing they wanted was for Komaida Nagito to rethink the deal while on his way to the insurance office, realizing how inconvenient it was to save the company money, and then change his mind. What would they do then? In the end, they agreed to meet the next day, with the man traveling from Tokyo to Yokohama to finalize the contract. After Komaida Nagito hung up the phone, Amuro Toru had just finished preparing dinner. Amuro Toru, while in the kitchen, vaguely overheard words like contract and no money, which immediately raised his suspicions. As a police officer, undercover agent, and intelligence gatherer, he was naturally sensitive to such phrases. As he emerged from the kitchen, he began to wonder if this kid, Komaida Nagito, had perhaps been scammed. With his expert conversational skills, Amuro Toru casually brought up the topic as if making small talk, asking, "Was that a telemarketer?" "No, it was from the insurance company," Komaida Nagito explained. "You know how I got kidnapped? It was about that." Amuro Toru started to piece things together. "Ah, the insurance company. By the way, whose insurance did you buy?" Komaida Nagito gave the same answer that matched Amuro Toru's intel. "Tei Corporation Insurance." "Tei Corporation, huh?" Amuro Toru sighed. Tei Corporation had become a malignant force in Japan, a capitalist giant that shamelessly trampled over the law. They sought out those that society wouldn't miss, like vagrants or those desperate to make a quick buck, and dragged them into life-or-death gambling matches for the entertainment of wealthy spectators. The people who ran Tei Corporation and those who attended such events were all rotten to the core. Unfortunately, targets from his investigations often ended up involved with Tei Corporation, just like his current mission in Yokohama. Shaking off his troubling thoughts, Amuro Toru decided to focus on the present. "Come on, let's eat." Komaida Nagito, always polite, helped set the table, grabbing the bowls and chopsticks. Once seated across from Amuro Toru, he folded his hands in thanks. "Thanks for the food." The aroma was tantalizing, even more so than the usual beef bowls Komaida Nagito bought at places specializing in such dishes. It smelled like it was going to taste much better too. With heightened anticipation, Komaida Nagito carefully took a bite. His eyes lit up immediately. "Amuro-san!" Komaida exclaimed, delighted. "Your cooking is amazing. This is the best beef bowl I've ever had. To be lucky enough to eat such a delicious meal made by you, I'm truly fortunate." Amuro Toru wiped away a bead of sweat. "You're exaggerating." "That's not an exaggeration." Komaida Nagito's voice, now brimming with excitement, began to take on a somewhat erratic, fanatic edge. Amuro-san, you need to recognize your talent, don't waste such an incredible gift. Though Komaeda Nagito himself was terrible at cooking, he had once been a student at Hope's Peak Academy, where he spent a significant amount of money eating at a restaurant run by an ultimate chef who had graduated from the academy. In his opinion, Amuro Toru's beef bowl, if made with slightly more luxurious ingredients, could rival the level of that ultimate chef. However, the chef had trained for years at Hope's Peak Academy, carefully honed by skilled teachers before finally achieving that level of mastery after graduation. Meanwhile, Amuro Toru. Komaeda Nagito couldn't shake the feeling that Amuro Toru had never received any formal culinary training. Amuro-san, did you study culinary? Komaeda Nagito asked. Ha, not at all, Amuro Toru chuckled. I learned from a friend of mine. He smiled. My friend is even better at cooking than I am. Every time he eats at a restaurant, he says, I could make this myself. He was talking about Morofushi Hiromitsu, his childhood friend. Back when they were still in police school, Hiromitsu would barely pay attention to girls, focusing instead on commenting about the techniques used in various restaurants. Now, his childhood friend, like him, was deep undercover in the black organization, with blood on his hands. Innocent or not, they both shared the same burden. This was why Amuro Toru, while hiding his true identity, made every effort to help others whenever he could. It was a way for him to stave off any psychological strain that might arise from the hardships of his undercover mission. In the eyes of the black organization, he was seen as someone who was entirely uninvolved with any real moral integrity, merely pretending to be a good person to gather information. They even dismissed him as someone with a peculiar sense of humor. All in all, Amuro Toru's cover was flawless. After all, he had been the top student in his class at the police academy. Now, after tasting Amuro Toru's cooking, Komaeda Nagito was more convinced than ever, though not about his real identity. His only thought was, why isn't he a chef? Your friend can cook even better than you. Komaeda Nagito leaned forward excitedly, pressing his hands on the table and looking at Amuro Toru with anticipation. Where does your friend work? Can you tell me the name of the restaurant? Amuro Toru leaned back slightly, feeling a bit puzzled by Komaeda Nagito's overly enthusiastic reaction. He's not a chef. Let's eat first, though. The food will get cold if we don't. Immediately, Komaeda Nagito sat back down in his seat. I almost ruined the perfect flavor of the meal you worked so hard to prepare. I really am hopeless. Amuro Toru. He had originally planned to chat about topics like the Port Mafia and Tei Corporation during dinner, but now he wasn't sure if it was a good idea. Komaeda Nagito's strange behavior made him reconsider the direction of their conversation. When did this kid become so peculiar? Amuro Toru wondered, trying to piece together what might have triggered such a reaction. So it can be said that his guardian is too irresponsible. He turning out like this is definitely that relative's fault. Without enough information to understand the full picture, Amuro Toru could only speculate, based on what he knew, that Komaeda Nagito's upbringing was the cause of his unusual behavior. From the records, Komaeda Nagito seemed to have had a fairly typical education, so it was difficult to pinpoint what went wrong. After they finished the meal in silence, Komaeda Nagito was the first to break it. Amuro-san, what would you like to know about Yokohama? Oh, Amuro Toru snapped back to attention. Before we get to that, you were at the Port Mafia headquarters yesterday, right? Were you alright? Not wanting to reveal his true intentions too early, he hoped to use this as a segue to learn more about Komaeda Nagito's connection to the Port Mafia, particularly with their executive candidate, Dazai Osamu, and whether Komaeda Nagito might have useful information. I'm fine, thank you for your concern. I really appreciate you taking me to the Port Mafia headquarters yesterday, Komaeda Nagito replied with a smile. Most people wouldn't be so willing. There was something deeper in Komaeda Nagito's words that made Amuro Toru wary. Though Komaeda Nagito was just a junior high schooler, Amuro Toru instinctively raised his guard. Maybe because I'm more daring than most? You know, as a folklorist, you end up encountering all sorts of strange things during field research. Komaeda Nagito continued to smile innocently, though his words carried a subtle weight. But I can't shake the feeling that Amuro-san isn't just a regular person. Komaeda Nagito wasn't about to forget his earlier suspicions about Amuro Toru's identity just because of one meal. Ayatsuji Yukito had already mentioned that Amuro Toru's background seemed far more complicated than it appeared on the surface, and Komaeda Nagito naturally agreed with that assessment. Under other circumstances, Komaeda Nagito wouldn't have been so direct with his probing, he would have taken a more roundabout approach. However, the moment Komaeda Nagito made his earlier comment, he sensed a barely noticeable shift in Amuro Toru's attitude. It was a subtle but significant change, indicating that Amuro Toru was highly sensitive to any attempts to probe. Continuing in that manner might have backfired. This only made him more certain that Amuro Toru wasn't just an ordinary person. Fortunately, his instincts had always been sharp. Although he didn't have enough time on the island to gather more information, their interactions over the last 2 days made him feel that a little more direct probing wouldn't hurt. Amuro Toru wasn't the type to reveal anything significant under such light questioning, though. He smiled wryly and tried to deflect the conversation with a subtle shift in focus. There are still far more ordinary people in the world. It's not that easy to run into someone with abilities. Too bad, I'm not one of them. Komaeda Nagito replied. I wasn't suggesting anything about supernatural abilities. Then what else could you mean? Amuro Toru raised his hands in defeat. I feel pretty normal myself. Amuro Toru couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a mistake. Originally, his plan was simple, since they'd already run into each other and he had a chance to gather intel, why not take the opportunity? But now, instead of obtaining useful information from Komaeda Nagito, he found himself being questioned. He had gone through Komaeda Nagito's records, and it was clear that the boy wasn't involved in any illegal organizations. So why was Komaeda Nagito asking these questions? What would a normal kid gain from prying like this? What are kids these days? Are their curiosity this intense? Komaeda Nagito noticed that Amuro Toru had only hesitated for a brief moment before returning to his composed demeanor. It was clear that Amuro Toru was adept at controlling the conversation, and further probing would likely lead nowhere. So, Komaeda Nagito smiled and changed tactics. I just think that someone as capable as Amuro-san shouldn't remain unknown for so long. Anyway, what was it you wanted to ask me earlier? Amuro Toru nearly strained his back from the abrupt conversational turn. You've already suspected so much, how am I supposed to ask anything now? He stayed silent for 2 seconds, feeling slightly frustrated, before choosing a safe question that wouldn't expose his true intentions. What's your relationship with that Dazai from the Port Mafia? Chapter 25 End.